In 2000, we bought an abandoned 100-acre farm in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. We spent years cleaning it up, built a new house, and now are trying to make it a functional homestead farm. Welcome to Red Tool House.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Red Tool House. Today I want to talk about what species of trees do you want to keep in your silvopasture. Well, you may be wondering, okay, Troy, what the heck is silvopasture? Well, go back and look at episode 46 where we talk about it, but it's basically just utilizing forest and agricultural elements kind of timed together. Another term is agroforestry. And also, if you look at our playlist of videos we did where I had my buddy Jeff Parsons, who's a forester, come out and we talked about timber, we talked about all kinds of things in consideration on your homestead. I'll post a link here so you can check out those videos. But silvopasture or agroforestry, of course, is just utilizing your forest land, incorporating agricultural elements into it. So we're not talking about clear cutting and just cutting all this down and putting in corn or something like that. Actually, what I want to do in this situation where I'm standing, this may look somewhat familiar to you all that have followed the channel for a while. This is an area on my north ridge. It's almost all white oak. I mean, gorgeous stand of white oak. And the white oak has actually come pretty dense. You can see some of these trees that are fighting for canopy space with one another. Well, with silvopasture and trying to incorporate these elements into this area, I would like to get pigs up here and rotate them through in a process, have different pastures that they can move through, and be able to take advantage of all this protein that lays on the ground in the fall. This year we had a prolific output of acorns and walnuts and hickories. I mean, it was like walking on marbles when you'd come through the woods. So our pigs had access to some of it. They don't have access to all of it. And putting fence up and trying to fence all this in right now would be really tough because they are way, way down there in the valley. And I'm up here halfway up the side of the mountain. So at some point, I do want to get to where I can have these pastures, that I can have them in here for a week or two and move to the next pasture a week or two, so forth, in the fall to be able to come through and vacuum these up. But actually, what I want to do, of course, is open this up a little bit. I'd like a combination of all the protein coming from the trees, but also get some pasture grasses coming in. And right now, it's early spring, so the leaves aren't on. But right now, this would get very little sunlight with the density of trees that we have once the leaves are in the canopy. So we want to thin some of these out, but we want to be selective. I just don't want to come in here and cut for the sake of cutting. So what's the game plan? Well, I'm going to approach this game plan in a series of steps, and this is going to take a while to do, so don't expect to see any videos anytime soon of this finished product, because this could possibly take years. Depends on how aggressive we get with this. But the first thing I'm going to do, of course, is identify trees that are diseased or have immediate issues there that, hey, they got to come out anyway. So take like this wild cherry here. This thing has been naturally pollarded. The top has been blown out and has fallen. It's got some rot and some damage here. It looks like some woodpecker damage, but you can see it actually is still growing. New shoots. These things are actually this tree's trying to actually come back. Well, there's no way this tree's going to ever become profitable. It's not going to do anything. Eventually the disease is going to catch up with it. So obviously that should come out. Now it's really not taking up a lot of canopy right now, but that's one thing to consider. Here we have the almost extinct ash. So if you look at this ash tree, say, okay, wow, this one's fighting in the canopy of this white oak here. It's probably not going to win out unless I remove that white oak, but emerald ash borer is probably going to sink his teeth in this this year or next year, whenever it finds it. All the other ash around here, the bigger ones, are dead already. So logically, I should say, well, you cut my losses and cut it and get it out of there. I just can't bring myself to doing that, so I'll probably leave this one here until the ash borer kills it. But it just breaks my heart to think about all the ash that's being lost. So, this tree wouldn't be cut out, even though I know at some point it will be diseased and will have to come down. Now, if you look at even something like this oak is part of a double trunk. This was actually cut 17 years ago when I had it timbered. They cut this leg out and left this leg because this one hadn't grown enough. This one is actually somewhat marketable now. It has a little bit of growth on it. But because it's a double trunk, you know, there's disease and rot starting here. Is that working into this tree? Is this one becoming weak? So I have some of those around like that. So of course, looking for disease. Hey, looky here. You can tell it's spring when the box turtles come out. A little terrapin there, just kicking it through the woods. Love this time of year. So we'll identify the diseased trees first and take those out. So what's next? Well, so the next step is really identifying species. What species of tree do I want to keep and what do I want to get rid of? Well, I'm standing right here. There's what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 if you count this guy back here. White oak trees. And you know, this is in a 15, 20 foot area here. Got white oaks and they're really competing with one another. White oak is definitely a tree to keep in a silvopasture setup, simply because it's a long-term grower. It's a tree that usually is pretty hardy, produces tons and tons of acorns, of course, and is just an overall good tree. A lot of good canopy, a lot of good things there. So definitely keep the white oak in. So that's one species that I'm going to keep. And of course, white oak's easy to identify by its bark. It has this scaly bark. And pretty straight limbs. Sometimes it gets a big old butt, and it may sound funny, but if you notice they come down and not as pronounced as a cypress, but they come down and they have this little bit of a flare usually at the bottom. But they have these larger scales of bark, not as big as scales as you'd see with a shagbark hickory, but they have those type of scales. So I can look out through here and see majority of white oak. Now there's other oak, of course, that are viable and good idea to keep. Like I can see right there, there's a black oak. And again, there's different names for these. I don't use the scientific names, but from a forestry perspective, that's kind of how we look at it. So you look at white oak is good, red oak, black oak. The only oak that I probably would not keep, and I only have some further at the top of the mountain, is chestnut oak. Now chestnut oak doesn't produce chestnuts. They call it chestnut oak because of the size of the acorns it produces. But a chestnut oak grows on a real rocky soil usually, which we have further up the top of the mountain. And what happens is that tree has a pretty weak root system, but it also, here in West Virginia, the chestnut oak rots out. It core rots really badly. So when I go up and I see on the top of the mountain, when I have roads blocked, it's usually a chestnut oak that's given up the ghost and fallen over. So I would probably take those out. But in this area right here, I don't know that I have any chestnut oak. I haven't seen any. But those are the type of oaks that I would definitely keep. Not sure how good this shot looks with the sun in my back, but I wanted to shoot right here because it was kind of a good opportunity to prove a point. The next species of tree that I would definitely keep in my silvopasture would be hickory. And right here is a little juvenile hickory. He's a shagbark hickory. And of course you can see why they call him shagbark. Got these big old plates that come off. As they get older too, those plates get big, get really hairy. They just kind of look like a unkempt tree. So those produce, this year we had a ton of hickory nuts. And I can see the squirrels, of course, have waged war on them, so I can see the hulls of the hickory nut. So the shagbark hickory is, again, easy to identify, so I'm definitely keeping that. Well, its close cousin or brother or nephew's uncle, however you want to look at it, is the Nut Hickory, which is a nut producing tree as well. It has a totally different bark pattern. It has smaller scales, and it's kind of funny when you look at it. It's like the bark kind of cross hatches. It just kind of, it seems to go, it has all these little intersections with it. But these guys crank out the hickory nuts as well, and did so really well last fall. So I would definitely keep hickory trees. So you can see these two are close together, and yeah, there's some canopy fight going on there. So we'd have to figure out what would make the most sense here. Maybe this one has a pretty good curl in it, so maybe it would be the one to go if we had to remove one. But hickory is a good tree to keep. The next tree I'd keep in my silvopasture would be beech. Even though I have a love-hate relationship with the beech tree, this tree is, looks pretty mild, little, pretty tame, no big deal. But what's crazy about a beech, at least here in where we are in this part of Appalachia, these limbs, as they grow out, man, they just seem to grow and grow and grow. I've beech trees with 20-foot long limbs, it seems like, just going out. So when they're green and bushy, there's just no grass growing around them because they have such a thick canopy, reaches so far, it really really chokes out any vegetation underneath it. So if I kept beech in the silvopasture, I definitely would have to keep pruning it if I wanted grass to grow around it. But why the beech? Well, the beech, of course, produces beech nuts, which are smaller than the typical acorn, but they still, here goes one now, rotten. But they produce nuts, and pigs love them, squirrels love them, basically any woodland creature that eats nuts loves them. So they are pretty handy to have, and they're easy to identify. They have a very, very smooth bark. And it kind of stands out in the woods. But this time of year, the easiest way to identify beech is by looking at the leaves. The leaves are still on it. And it's one of the few trees that, at least in our area, when over winter, the leaves really don't fall off. They only fall off when the new buds come on and knock them off. So you can walk through the woods very easily and say, oh, there's a beech tree. There's a beech tree. I can look through here. I see 6 of them behind the camera here. So they've still got a lot of leaves left on them. So it's a good tree to have for that matter. And again, love-hate relationship with it when it comes to how far it branches out. Well, the last tree that I would keep specifically for my silvopasture would be a walnut. And actually, in this area where I'm thinking about doing this, I don't have any walnuts. I think there may be one down over the valley, or next to the last bench before you get down all the way to the valley. Just one. It's actually right by my pistol range. So I would definitely keep it. But if I had a lot of walnut in this area, most of my walnut is way back up on the south ridge. But if I had a bunch of walnuts, or any walnut, I'd keep those because obviously they can produce really, really good protein. And actually, walnuts, proteins for your pigs or proteins for we humans, really tasty. So I keep a walnut as well. The thing with a walnut, of course, their leaves, I think it's called jugalone is the chemical in, or juglin, I'm not quite sure. Something with a J. Look it up. It is a growth inhibitor, so it really keeps things from growing up around it. So again, in the silvopasture setting, and if I had a bunch of walnut, just know not to expect to have a lot of grass in that area that would really kind of choke it out. But those would be the ones that I would keep specifically for silvopasture. Again, there's a lot of other trees in the Appalachian hardwood forest that are great trees, and I love them. But in looking at making this area here specifically silvopasture, those would be the ones that I would keep. So just walking through this area, looking at trees that I would not keep. And I would not keep this guy right here. This is a Tulip Poplar, and it's a pretty good sized tree. Really nice saw log. It doesn't produce nuts, doesn't produce any type of protein for my pigs. But man, this is a great saw log. This would be great for barnwood. This would be great for building extra buildings, cabins, whatever. So this guy I would definitely slate for the mill. Put them on there, and I have a ton of poplar. There's different places on the property where poplar grows all over the place. Have a little red maple right here, which, while red maple doesn't produce protein, I'm struggling with this. I may keep the maples simply because they're not doing so great in our North American Appalachian hardwood forests. Especially sugar maple seems to be thinning out. So I may keep some of the maples in place. And of course, red maple you can tap for maple syrup just like you can for sugar maple. You just don't get as much production out of it. Right behind here actually is a nice little stand of locust. So this is a locust, that's a locust, that's a locust, that's a locust. Right beside that cherry. Big old poison ivy vine on that. Whew. But these locust trees, of course, they grow super fast. They're nitrogen fixers, so they're obviously good for the soil, bring up a lot of nutrient. But man, they make great fence posts. So if I'm in need for fence posts as we expand pasture, then I know to come up here. There's quite a few locusts in here in this little area. And this was cleared at one time, so that's why you see those type of pioneering trees coming in. So those locusts will probably come out and become fence posts. Well, another tree that I would not necessarily keep in my silvopasture would be, that's a big poison ivy vine, is, I'm not going to touch that, is wild cherry. So we have there's 4 wild cherry right here in this area. So I would not keep the wild cherry for silvopasture. Now again, really awesome in the workshop. I'm not touching that tree, I think it's covered in poison ivy. Really great in the wood shop, beautiful wood of course, great for furniture. Really not something I'd want to keep on the silvopasture. So I'd take these out. Some of them pretty scruffy, even for the mill. But that one would be a nice one to mill up. There's a couple more. So got a lot of cherry. Now again, cherries seem to grow in areas that were once cleared. They're again one of those second growth type trees, so I do have quite a bit around here. So I definitely would take those out simply because they're not going to be producing protein for the pigs and not to contribute to the silvopasture. So there's a lot of other undergrowth trees or other species of trees that I wouldn't necessarily keep on the silvopasture. I obviously won't go through and try to detail all of them, but things like redbud and some of those other undergrowth, they really don't get big. When they do grow, they usually end up dying out. So there'd be quite a bit of those that I would remove. Now again, I'm not saying I'm doing this on the entire land. It's just this one area that I want to focus on silvopasture. So I've identified the trees by species that I would keep and the ones I would take out. But there's one more thing I'd want to look at is, of those that I want to keep, who wins and who loses in a certain situation. Because I have a ton of white oak in here, and I can't keep every single white oak and be able to open enough canopy up to get some pasture grass growing in here. So what are my choices are going to be? How am I going to make decisions to remove which white oaks? Well, the first thing I'd want to look at is obviously location. Where is the tree in location to my pasture and what I'm going to do? Well, this tree we've actually talked about. Jeff and I have talked about it before, and we've spent some time discussing this tree. This tree, as you see, is a double trunk. So it goes up about 10 feet and branches out into two main trunks. You know, if you were to slice this in a cross section, look, the scar of that crotch would come all the way down here where these once were small saplings and came together. So as far as timber value, this tree has very little, if no, timber value to it. So it's a huge tree. It doesn't have a lot of timber value to it, but my goodness, if you took out some of the other trees around it, maybe this white oak behind it, this white oak here that's competing, if you took those out, you can see, I don't know if I've got the camera angled enough, but that canopy of this tree would open up tremendously. So the amount of acorns that this tree is already producing could double, could triple, could quadruple just by moving some of these competing trees around it. Some of these lower branches would start to grow out more and bush up. So I could get in a situation here where I remove a lot of the white oak around it, the smaller white oak that has timber value to it, get the money from that to help fund this, this improvement, and then let this tree flourish. I mean, it could really produce, it could maybe end up producing more acorns than everybody around here that I took out combined. So you get the best of both worlds there, where you're replacing, or you're opening up pasture, and you're getting more acorn production, but you also take out some of the trees to get the financial benefits from it. Well, we've already talked about taking out the disease trees, so I definitely would look at that, even with the white oaks, looking around and seeing, okay, what is showing signs of disease, what's showing maybe something that's got a really funky bend to it that you know over time is not going to make it. There's a white oak here that was a double trunk, and the one trunk's completely rotted out, so that would need to come out. But then also looking at where the sun goes. Again, if the goal is to open up the canopy so more sunlight gets in here and allows pasture grass to grow, then the sun in the summertime, of course, travels this way. This is east, this is west. So the sun goes this direction. So if you think about it, if the sun's in the sky this way, looking at linearly, in a linear fashion, working on the canopy so when it does green up and grow, that the canopy's above the sun, so the sun is able to come down and get on the forest floor. So strategically locating trees and saying, okay, we want the line of sight for the sun to be able to get on the most exposure of this bench, if that's what we're going for. So looking at even sun placement and seeing how that works, we take out some trees that way. So the last thing that I'll take into consideration when clearing out some of these trees for silvopasture, of course, is just simply the lay of the pasture. This is one of my favorite spots of the property. It's south facing, gets tons of sunlight. For West Virginia, it has a nice lay to it. I wouldn't say that it's flat by any means, but it has a nice lay to it. If I'm standing here, I can see the house all the way down the valley. I can see the barn and the workshop. It's just a really neat area. I really enjoy it. So thinking, okay, well, some of these areas here, I'd maybe want to clear out just a little bit more so I can enjoy more of that view and just appreciate the aesthetics of making this area pasture. So some of that will come into play as well. Well, if you've got woodland on your homestead and you're thinking about cutting some of those trees down to open up for pasture, really do some research and reading on silvopasture and consider that. There may be some trees that you specifically want to take out and some you want to leave behind simply because of the benefits they'd add. Well, we hope you like this video. If you do, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please go ahead and do so. Feel free to comment below if you have any suggestions or just commentary on what we've talked about. And check us out on our website, redtoolhouse.com. You can find us on Facebook as well, facebook.com/redtoolhousefarm. One that didn't make it through the year there. Well, we hope you enjoyed this video. Everybody take care.